Tensions between Washington and Moscow have once again flared, as President Vladimir Putin brushed off new U.S. sanctions and vowed that Russia would not yield to foreign pressure. Labeling the sanctions as unfriendly and politically motivated, Putin struck a tone of defiance, insisting that no amount of Western coercion would alter Russia's stance on the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump, standing beside his Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, offered a calm but pointed response. "I'm glad he feels this way. We'll see how it works out in 6 months." As both leaders maneuver through one of the most complex geopolitical standoffs of their administrations, the world watches closely. Are these just words, or the start of another escalation between two nuclear powers? Chapter 1. Putin's Defiance. No self-respecting country caves to pressure. In a fiery speech delivered from the Kremlin on Thursday, Vladimir Putin declared that Russia would not bow to U.S. sanctions, framing them as part of Washington's long-term effort to contain Russia. No self-respecting country does anything under pressure, Putin said firmly. This is an unfriendly act, and we are well aware that the U.S. intends to use economic warfare to influence our policies, but Russia will continue to defend its sovereignty. The new sanctions, announced earlier this week by the Trump administration, target Russia's two largest oil firms, Lukoil and Rosneft, as well as several banks and networks accused of helping Moscow evade earlier restrictions. The U.S. Treasury described the measures as part of a comprehensive pressure campaign aimed at forcing Russia into a ceasefire in Ukraine. But Putin appeared unfazed. He dismissed the sanctions as political theater, claiming Russia's economy had already adapted to Western restrictions since 2014. Chapter 2. Trump's Measured Reaction. We will see. Reporters immediately asked President Trump about Putin's remarks during a White House press briefing on Thursday. "I'm glad he feels this way," Trump said, smiling slightly. Then, pausing beside Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he added, "I'll let you know about it in 6 months. Let's see how it works out." The president's tone was calm but deliberate, suggesting both confidence in the sanctions and a willingness to escalate if Russia resists. Behind the scenes, U.S. officials confirmed that Trump's team had already begun assessing secondary sanctions on companies in Asia and the Middle East accused of facilitating Russian oil sales. These moves indicate that Washington's campaign could intensify further. Chapter 3. Missiles and Warnings. Putin's escalation threat. In another part of his statement, Putin directly warned Washington against supplying long-range missiles, including Tomahawks, to Ukraine. "This is an attempt at escalation," Putin declared. "If such weapons are used to strike Russian territory, the response will be very serious, if not devastating." The Russian leader's tone was uncharacteristically sharp, underscoring growing frustration within the Kremlin as Western arms deliveries to Kyiv continue to expand. Putin has long claimed that U.S. weapons in Ukraine represent a direct threat to Russian national security. His latest remarks, however, mark one of his strongest warnings yet, hinting at the possibility of retaliation beyond Ukraine's borders. Chapter 4. Kremlin's Strategy. We act in our own interests. On Friday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told Russian media that authorities were still analyzing the sanctions and would respond in a manner that serves Russia's interests. "We will do what best suits our country," Peskov said. "We are acting not against anyone, but for our own benefit." His comments signal that Moscow may prepare countermeasures, possibly targeting U.S. companies operating in Russia or restricting access to key raw materials like titanium and palladium, which are critical for Western industries. At the same time, Peskov sought to project calm, suggesting that Russia had long anticipated these sanctions and built economic buffers to withstand them. Chapter 5. Economic Pressure, Sanctions and Counter-Sanctions. The latest round of sanctions is among the harshest yet. The U.S. targeted Russia's energy revenues, financial institutions, and maritime logistics networks, while the European Union unveiled its 19th sanctions package in coordination with Washington. European measures also hit individuals accused of circumventing earlier restrictions, signaling a united Western front. The goal, according to U.S. and EU officials, is to force Moscow to accept a ceasefire and return to the negotiating table after talks collapsed earlier this month. However, economists note that Russia's economy has remained surprisingly resilient. High oil prices and a pivot toward trade with China and India have softened the impact of Western sanctions. Chapter 6. The Cancelled Meeting. Who's telling the truth? A separate controversy erupted after Trump announced he had canceled a planned summit with Putin. "We canceled the meeting," Trump told reporters. "It didn't feel right to meet. It didn't feel like we were going to get where we needed to be, so I canceled it. I don't want a wasted meeting." However, within hours, Putin contradicted that version, saying the meeting had not been canceled, merely postponed. The summit was postponed, not canceled, Putin insisted. It would be a mistake to hold it without proper preparation. The U.S. side proposed the meeting and the location. Chapter 7. Geopolitical Ripple Effects. The ripple effects of this confrontation are global. In Europe, NATO officials have warned that further sanctions could push Russia closer to China, forming an anti-Western economic bloc. Meanwhile, European energy markets remain volatile, as uncertainty grows over potential Russian countermeasures. In Asia, countries like India and Vietnam are carefully balancing relations with both Washington and Moscow, wary of being caught in the crossfire of new trade restrictions. Financial markets have also reacted nervously. The ruble initially dipped after the sanctions announcement, but quickly rebounded, suggesting investors believe Moscow will withstand the latest pressure campaign. Chapter 8. Putin's long game and Trump's gamble. Both leaders are playing long games, but with very different goals. For Putin, this is about projecting strength and showing that Russia remains a global power capable of enduring Western isolation. His message to domestic audiences is clear: Russia will not surrender under U.S. pressure. For Trump, however, the sanctions serve multiple purposes. They are both a geopolitical tool and a domestic signal of strength. By taking a hard stance against Moscow, Trump appeals to hawkish lawmakers and distances himself from critics who accuse him of being too soft on Russia. His remark, "We'll see how it works out in 6 months," suggests that Trump expects the sanctions to yield visible results before the 2026 midterm elections, either by forcing Moscow to negotiate or by weakening its economy. For now, the standoff continues. Russia insists the sanctions will fail, while the U.S. believes economic isolation will eventually force Moscow to compromise. The next 6 months, the timeline Trump himself mentioned, will be crucial. Economists will track whether Russia's oil revenues decline, while defense analysts will watch how Moscow responds militarily. In the end, both Trump and Putin are playing to their strengths and their audiences. Putin projects defiance and sovereignty. Trump projects dominance and unpredictability. Their exchange over sanctions may seem routine, but it encapsulates the broader struggle between Washington's pressure and Moscow's pride. As Trump said with a knowing smile, we'll see how it works out. For now, the world waits, watching whether those 6 months will bring compromise, confrontation, or yet another chapter in a rivalry that continues to shape global politics.